Hi there, I'm Haruka. I've spoken before about how the best trash in media is the kind of trash that knows its place, that knows it's trash. I also said that I wanted to give you all more fun literary definitions. This week, I come to you with a video that combines those two concepts. So, to be honest, I actually came up with this definition after watching Bunny Girl Senpai for the first time, and I've been kind of waiting for my moment to reveal this concept to the world. And recently, I found the perfect anime to epitomize what I mean. Saenai Heroine no Sora Takata, or Saekano, is the perfect definition of post-postmodernism. The English translation of Saekano's title is How to Raise a Boring Girlfriend. It's the story of a high school otaku boy, a second year by the name of Tomiya Aki, who decides that he simply must make a dating sim and teams up with 3 girls to make this possible. First, there's Yuraha Kasumi Gaoka, a third year at his school who is secretly a renowned light novel author. Second, there's Eruri Sawamura, a fellow second year at this school who is secretly a renowned doujin artist. She makes the lewds, and let's not talk about her age. Finally, there's the girl who inspired Tomiya to want to make this dating sim, Megumi Kato. Tomiya first saw Megumi at the top of a hill with cherry blossoms fluttering around her, but actually they've been classmates for a year already. Megumi is just really a boring and average girl that really just does well to blend into the background. The show isn't just about Tomiya's envisioned game, but also about the team training Megumi to emulate the styles of a classic waifu. Since she's the model of the game, she needs to look and act the part to help the others apparently. But while this happens, we notice that all the other girls in the show, except for Megumi, have already mastered their own waifu tropes. Yuraha is a kudere yandere hybrid who got rejected by Tomiya a year ago because he wanted her to write the story that she wanted to write, not the story he, an otaku critic, wanted her to write. So now she does everything in her power to intimidate the man sexually. Eruri is a tsundere and childhood friend of Tomiya who hadn't actually been his friend since they were 6 or something because she chose to be popular rather than openly enjoying her otaku interests alongside Tomiya. There's more characters and more waifus, but I'm not talking about them. This series is 2 seasons, 2 OVAs, and a movie, so eventually the plot goes past discussing these tropes that all these girls are inhabiting and starts to let the actual characters develop. They go beyond the simple kudere, the simple tsundere, and the simple umoto types, and a sort of sincerity develops out of what was once just jokes. The tropes aren't abandoned, but by spending more time with the characters, these girls grow out of their archetypes. Eruri and Yuraha both are faced with emotional hurdles that challenge their identity, that make them question what kind of person they truly want to be. And in the end, it's Megumi, the normal and boring girl who remains herself. She never stopped being herself. And despite being the same person from start to finish, it's the fact that we spent so much time with her that we now see her a different way. So why did I want to talk about this? And what did I say at the beginning? Post-postmodernism is something that technically has a Wikipedia page already, but there's a bunch of different definitions that I do not have the patience to read and try to understand underneath the pretentious verbiage of scholars. I've got my own definition, and it starts by simplifying the previous 2 art movements. Modernism was viewed as a sort of return to the classics, a way to portray beauty in its finest form. Postmodernism, as a response, asked the question of what modernists meant when they did certain things. It created this era of irony, of honestly confusing art, all based around a question: what is beauty? Finally, I believe that post-postmodernism is art that stops asking those questions because it already has an answer. Beauty is whatever I want it to be. Beauty may be subjective, but this is my own subjective take. It's no longer a question, but an affirmation. It acknowledges the questions from the postmodern era, but reaffirms the desire to create beauty from the modernist era. Saekano perfectly demonstrates this through a constant, self-aware nature and admittedly self-serving plot. Whenever you make an anime about something involving otaku culture, it opens the floodgates for the creators to provide meta remarks about the culture as a whole. In Saekano, there's legitimate debates between the characters about fan service, childhood friend tropes, and Megumi's outsider status in this otaku world allows her to bring forth real questions about the portrayal of women in this culture, especially when she's being told to emulate those characters. Extrapolating this, the original anime and otome games they're discussing are the modernist pieces. Megumi's and very often Yuraha's comments on otaku culture is postmodernism, providing questions on why things are done this way. But one of the best throwaway moments of the show, Tomiya explains to Megumi that this is just the way things are because people like the way things are. And while oversimplification may be an issue when it comes to utilizing tropes, building out of a trope with the acknowledgement of its shortcomings can actually help develop a character into something more three-dimensional. My favorite line of reasoning from the entire series comes from the movie, where Tomiya is getting notes on his writing for his second dating sim. The person reading it, Akane Kosaka, is a pro mangaka and doujin writer as well as a game director in her own right. Her advice after reading a script that he wrote as nuanced as possible? masturbate more. So she doesn't mean this literally, or at least not fully. Akane explains that the lifeblood of creation, especially in otaku culture, is your own personal fantasies. So they don't dive too hard into this in the actual movie since they have to get on with the plot, but I don't have to go back to a plot, so I'll do the job for them. An outside critic can look at anime and point out inherent problematic flaws, especially in things that often seem like shameless self-inserts and self-glorifying the otaku industry. But when you remove those elements, you're left with a terrible story. Sure, the critic can argue that if the story couldn't survive the removal of allegedly problematic elements, then it didn't deserve to be treated as a good story. But if I remove your spine and you die, I'm not going to say that your whole body didn't work just because it couldn't withstand the ability to hold itself up without a key piece of doing just that. An otaku main character may be overplayed, but it's relatable to those watching. The constant cycle of stereotypes may seem repetitive, but they stick around because people like them enough to continue using them, and they provide structure for those who still need a foothold at the beginning of a story. Anime provides escapism, and forcing reality into these spaces with a complete disregard of established tropes is a recipe for disaster. The best anime that transcend and subvert these tropes do so with an established understanding of what the tropes were in the first place. In my personal opinion, the best story in the post-postmodernist tradition acknowledges that there are countless different perceptions of beauty and countless different perceptions of good storytelling, but there isn't a need for constant questioning of what is good and bad. The creator provides their own answer for what they believe is good. It goes back to a small detail I mentioned earlier where Tomiya tells Yutaha not to make her story based around Tomiya's own fantasies. If he wants the story he wants, he should write it himself. Yutaha, the author, does not have an obligation to tell the audience a story that they want to hear, only a story that she wants to write. Critics and audiences can form their opinions of work and critique it afterwards, but they do not write it themselves. Speaking of critique, Saekano is obviously not a perfect anime. The discussions on tropes are kind of vapid. Don't get me wrong, it's highly amusing to hear anime girls arguing about the validity of fan service while they themselves are being used as fan service in an onsen scene. The issue is that many of their discussions on anime and otaku culture don't fully grab onto the same sort of interesting bits about underlying contradictions that make trashy anime so lovable. Then again, it does talk about it somewhat, hence the onsen discussion and Akane's comments in the movie. Ultimately, Saekano is less a good show in itself and more just a fan of the show that it wants to be. Literally, this show seems to want so badly to be Monogatari, with some weird animation quirks in the first season and an explicit mention of Monogatari itself in the second episode of season 2. It's also just an issue with self-aware media, which will always feel like some sort of parody or knockoff. The girls are really just knockoffs of Monogatari characters. Yutaha is basically Senjugahara to a T, and I think Michiru's Kamburu? No wonder I like Michiru so much. On the other hand, these self-aware jokes die out by the time things need to get real and sincere. I think that post-postmodernism, or my definition of post-postmodernism, is really interesting and creates an avenue for more honest storytelling. It's the kind of story that both rejects and embraces tradition and modernity, forming something that feels sincere and human. By removing the single-mindedness of modernism and the pretentiousness of postmodernism, all that's left is the sort of real beauty that both were trying to find. I don't feel like I went into detail as well as I wanted to about post-postmodernism, but I feel like this is a really good introduction. Maybe I might make a more focused video in the future, but I feel like Saekano really puts the most effort to approach each step of creating something within the post-postmodernist structure. Other works that I can suggest that have a sort of similar outlook to post-postmodernism are the aforementioned Rascal Does Not Dream of a Bunny Girl Senpai and the Monogatari series, but also Kanojo Okarishimasu, Next Life as a Villainess, and Hajimete no Gal. It's really just a show that has the courage to acknowledge how ridiculous it is while still providing a pure sincerity that is lacking in most ironic works. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and tell me if there's any anime that you've seen that follows this sort of artistic tradition. I'm always interested in finding more shows that unwittingly further my own agenda. There's a subscribe orb over there and another video over there, and that's all for me today.